So the Embargo Act is something going on during 1807, during Thomas Jefferson's presidency. It's also worth noting that during Thomas Jefferson's presidency in the year 1807, we see an ending of the slave trade. Okay. Now, that is not the same thing as saying that slavery itself was brought to an end, because it wasn't. The slave trade, or at least the Atlantic slave trade, where there was the business of the capturing of slaves from Africa, kidnapping them, and then transporting them to other parts of the world, including North America, that was brought to an end. I think it was brought to an end in England about not quite a decade before this time. And there's some evidence that states or colonies were moving toward an ending of the slave trade earlier. Well, what stopped them? Well, under the Articles of Confederation, about 11 out of the 13 states had plans to put an end to the Atlantic slave trade, or not participate in it anymore, and make it illegal to do so, not enforce it, not allow it to be enforced in their states. Remember, when the states were acting like 13 self-governing countries. Only, I think, Georgia and South Carolina at that time did not have plans to do that. So that's a move that would have been in a positive direction. Once the states joined together under the Constitution, one of the issues was that if they were going to be in a union together, there was the problem that states would now be able to attempt to use the US government in a way to gain power or advantage over the other states. And you had a situation where you have slave states and free states that are going to be in a union of states together. Okay, most of the states during the time of the Constitution were technically slave states because they had slavery legalized at that time. But a lot of states are moving toward putting slavery on the road to extinction. And a lot of states do get rid of slavery soon after that time of the Constitution. But you run into some problems that come with the states joining together. If the states join together and slaves escape from one slave region where their slavery is legal into a region where slavery is illegal, there's an issue there in terms of legally. So there's a legal issue of whether or not those slaves should be returned. The Constitution did require that. It's called the Fugitive Slave Clause. One of the other things that the Constitution required was that the slave trade not be closed until for 20 years, which is at this point in 1807, which Thomas Jefferson fully supported the ending of the Atlantic slave trade. Now, slavery would still continue, and people would still trade slaves within the United States in the states in which slavery was legal. But this is an advance, in a sense, against slavery. During this time as well, the Embargo Act, Jefferson declared an embargo on trade. An embargo means that a country is no longer allowed to trade with a certain other country. Okay, so for example, today and for the last 70 years, the United States has had an embargo against Cuba. They don't trade certain things with Cuba, okay, because Cuba was a communist government in the Western Hemisphere. But anyway, so certain things are not allowed to be traded, or you're not allowed to trade with another country for certain reasons. Okay, so the British, why Jefferson did this is that the British had been capturing US ships Okay, so they've been stealing US ships, capturing them. And so instead of going to war with the British, Jefferson's solution was an embargo, meaning, okay, the United States is now no longer, in order to punish the British for this, we're no longer going to trade with them. Okay, that kind of economic sanction, meaning you're okay, we're not going to, they have an advantage of trading with America. We're going to cut that off from them and not trade with them. Just choose not to do business with them for a while, because they keep stealing our stuff, capturing our ships. The problem with that is that there are a lot of people who that affected in the United States who make a living based off of trade with Great Britain. And most of them are concentrated in the North, the upper Northeast, where shipping and trade has been a big industry. If you think even back to the beginning of this class, shipping and trade started there even 100 years plus before this time. So actually almost more about 200 years almost at this time of tradition of a businesses of shipping and trade. Okay, so this upset New England, which is that region of the upper Northeast in America, because most trade occurred there, including, before that was made illegal, even the slave trade happened through states that even didn't have slavery. New England also formed a secession movement. They discussed separating from the United States, exiting the United States peacefully, joining together in a new confederation of the northern states, and then they would be free. They'd no longer be under the Constitution. They'd no longer be under the U.S. government, and then they would be free to trade with Great Britain. Okay. It was said during this time by Banner at the Hartford Convention, which is a book on this topic about different times when people have talked about this idea of secession, says whenever its, speaking of its, is there the Constitution, whenever its provisions are violated or its original principles departed from by a majority of the states or their people, it is no longer an effective instrument, but that any state is at liberty by the spirit of that contract to withdraw itself from the Union. So the argument being made by some of why they believed that it was their right to exit the United States and that their state could then operate as its own country and trade with, whoever they wanted to, they said that if the US government or the people or the states start to violate the promises that they agreed to in the Constitution, they said that at that point, it is the right of the state to take itself out of the contract, to withdraw from the contract because the contract has been broken. Okay. So this is the way a lot of people thought about this during Thomas Jefferson's presidency. So there were several times where they threatened exiting the Union when he got elected, the Louisiana Purchase, and during the embargo of 1807. So a lot of things happened during his presidency. First, he's the first president of the, kind of a transition from one political party or ideology or agenda to another, and that happens peacefully. Second, he does the Louisiana Purchase, okay, which doubles the size of the country. And that's not an unqualified good. There are some good things from that and some challenges from that, but that is a huge historical event, and that allows the exploration of the West, the opening up of more states that are going to take over those territories, has impact on the people already living there. It leads to Lewis and Clark's expedition to go all the way eventually to the Pacific Ocean and return. When Jefferson gets elected, lots of people threaten to exit the Union. They do so also during the Louisiana Purchase. The Atlantic slave trade is ended during Jefferson's presidency by the United States, and there's an embargo act placed on England that causes other states to threaten to leave again. In addition to that, things are moving in a direction where there will be another war between America and England in about 5 years from 1807. And that's the War of 1812 for similar reasons. There's kind of the stealing of American ships and cargo. At that point, there's going to be the stealing of Americans to take them and put them into the British Navy. But we'll talk about that at another time. So Thomas Jefferson's presidency is pretty eventful, has all these things going on with it. Yeah, so quite a bit happens during this time.